welcome everybody. We are officially at the 2 o'clock hour, which means, well, 2 o'clock if you're in Central Time or Eastern Time, excuse me. But we are officially at the top of the hour, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us today, and welcome to the Monarch Conservation webinar series. Today's webinar is the Butterfly and Bumblebee Effect, Voluntary Conservation for At-Risk Species with Caroline Hernandez, Assistant Director, and Catherine O'Reilly, Partner Coordinator with the Sustainable Landscapes Program at the University of Illinois, Chicago. My name is Alyssa Taylor. I am a Program Coordinator with the Monarch Joint Venture. I am joined behind the scenes by my coworker, Jenna Tots, who's Education Coordinator with the Monarch Joint Venture as well. She'll be dealing with any tech issues that you might be having. So if you have any problems, you could throw that into the chat and she'll connect with you. We do want to give a big shout out to our sponsors for their support for this webinar series, our supporting sponsor, Reinvent Your Waste. We appreciate your support and dedication to the Monarch Conservation webinar series. If you or your company is interested in sponsoring this year, there's still time, so please reach out to us. You can email learn@monarchjointventure.org, and Jenna can throw that into the chat for you guys as well. Before we get started here, we do have a couple of community guidelines and helpful hints for the webinar. So if you're joining us today, but you didn't get a chance to pre-register for the webinar, we would like to count you, 1, for attendance, and 2, to be able to send you our follow-up email. So if there are resources and you'd like to have those, we do want to connect with you. So again, you'll just email learn@monarchjointventure.org with your name, city, and state. That would be greatly appreciated. The webinar is going to be recorded today, so you can, if you need to hop off early, you'll be able to check it out. It'll be posted on the Monarch Joint Venture website by Friday. And the entire webinar conservation series is on the website. So if you're looking for a specific topic, you can explore there. It contains about 10 years worth of Monarch conservation webinars, so you can really explore whatever you like. During the webinar, please put your questions in the Q&A box that'll be found down at the bottom of your screen. We'll collect those for the Q&A session at the end, so Caroline and Catherine will have the opportunity to answer some of your questions. And remember, please use the reactions during the presentation. We can't see you all, but the speakers can see your reactions, so please feel free to use those. Those will be found also at the bottom of your screen as well. We do want to remind you that there are translated captions on this Zoom call. So if you'd like to add captions in another language other than English, you can click the arrow on the captions and be sure to use the translation button and choose your caption language as you need. And finally, all of our webinar speakers represent their own viewpoints, which are not necessarily those of the Monarch Joint Venture. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce our wonderful speakers for the day. First up is Caroline Hernandez. She's the Assistant Director of the Sustainable Landscapes Program at the Energy Resources Center for the University of Illinois, Chicago. In her role, Caroline supports the Rights of Way as Habitat Working Group while overseeing programs engaging energy and transportation leaders throughout the U.S. and Canada in the creation and conservation. Holds a dual master's degree in international relations and natural resources and sustainable development, and has a background in globalization, sustainable development, and climate change. And I'm gonna let her tell you the name of her dog at the beginning of her presentation. And Catherine O'Reilly is our partner coordinator for the Sustainable Landscapes team at the Energy Resource Center as well, and facilitates the administration and outreach of the Rights Way as Habitat Working Group and its conservation agreements, which aim to create pollinator habitat on energy and transportation lands, in addition to the growing Chicago Habitat Initiative. And without further ado, I'm going to quit talking and turn it over to our speakers today so that they have plenty of time to share their presentation. And so I'm going to quit sharing my screen and turn it over to you, Caroline. Thank you.
Thank you, Alyssa. All right. As I set this up, just because of that prompt, so the dog in that picture, his name is Jean-Claude Van Woof, and he joined me for that conference and meeting people, and he had a cute little bee outfit on as well. All right. right, Catherine. I've also given you remote access. Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for joining us. Really impressive turnout today. So I am thrilled to be talking to you all and joined by Catherine to talk about our conservation agreements and the work that we do. So just to take a step back, we're talking about pollinators. We're talking about habitat and conserving habitat. About 10 years ago, the White House called for cross-sector collaboration through this national strategy to promote the health of honeybees and pollinators. And in this strategy, they said that there's this dire need for collaboration and public and private partnerships, from rural to urban, residential to industrial. Everyone needs to get together. All hands need to get together to create and conserve habitat across the United States to support pollinators. And so you'll notice on the diagram to the right, we have energy and transportation lands as one of those hands on this deck that we need. So you might be asking yourself, if you're not aware of our work, why energy and transportation lands? So rights of way in this scenario span the entirety of the United States. You have anywhere you look, you've got electric transmission lines, you've got oil and gas pipelines, you have rail, and you have roadways, and all of them are managing their lands in a way that ensures that you are getting your electricity, you're getting your gas, you're getting your transportation of goods and services and people. But when they're managed they have the opportunity to be managed for habitat. You've got growing things. You can mow them. You can do all of these things to ensure that the right of way is providing that resource. But you've got growing things, and you can do things to also ensure that you've got habitat on the ground for at-risk species, for anything that needs habitat. And we're in an age that we are seeing less and less natural and native habitat across the United States, across the world, and we need more of it all of the time, everywhere. And so we have turned to rights of way as this opportunity to create habitat and to conserve it. So also about 10 years ago, back in 2015, we had a couple of energy companies and transportation agencies reach out to us at the University of Illinois, Chicago, and they said, hey, we are managing for habitat, we're managing our rights of way, but we know we're not doing this in a vacuum. We want to make sure that we're doing it with the latest resources, the latest research. We want to learn from each other, collaborate with one another. Can you help us with this? So of course we said yes. This seems like a great opportunity, and so we started convening everybody, and we not only had energy and transportation organizations, but we began to build on this collaboration of organizations. And we got our representation from energy and transportation, but we also started getting involvement from nonprofit partners, those conservation groups and environmental groups. We got involvement from our technical experts, and we also got involvement from the government. We have, anyone from the local government to the federal government supporting this work that these energy companies and transportation agencies are doing across the country to create and conserve habitat. Now, in the past 10 years, we have, in my opinion, accomplished quite a bit. We have a number of programs and research activities that we're doing, supporting the Rights of Ways Habitat Working Group. We're going to dig into those conservation agreements that Alyssa mentioned at the beginning. So we've got our Monarch agreement, we have a Bumblebee agreement, and so I'm gonna save those for later. But in this working group, we have also developed ways to measure the quality of habitat, the quantity of habitat, track it in a geospatial database, and then we're also continually providing learning opportunities. So we have webinars of the latest research or the latest practitioners that get together. They present what they've learned and are doing, and we'll have roundtable discussions where we can ask each other questions and find the latest. We also have workshops where we get together in person. We've been doing that a lot for the last couple of years with the Monarch joint venture, where we have been collaborating across the country and now internationally to learn from each other, best management practices. And see where there are opportunities for further research tools and support. We have been supporting nature-based sustainability reporting. We have a resource list library with your case studies, best management practices, resources. We have an interactive seed map with the native seed vendors that can really support the large scale of native seed that is necessary on our website. And then we're doing a number of research projects. So we're looking at the co-location of large-scale solar with pollinator habitat and agriculture in a different study, and then what habitat might look like from a remote sensing standpoint, so from drones or from satellites. We also have some localized efforts with our Growing Chicago Habitat Initiative, like Catherine had, and we try and keep an updated calendars and news. And so I just wanted to give you that overview, so we have our flagship agreements, our conservation agreements, but really these stemmed from this collaboration of organizations and people that are working together, identifying needs, and they've done so much in addition to these agreements. So if you are interested in any of those additional agreements, we have our website where you can go and you can find them on the resources and projects page, and you can go in and find some of those tools and metrics as well. So just wanted to give you kind of a broad overview of where we're coming from and how we've gotten to this point of creating a Monarch agreement. Oops, sorry.
Thank you for that, Caroline. So Caroline mentioned that there's a lot of different projects that the Rights of Ways Habitat Working Group has been involved with over the past 10 years. And one of the ones that we wanted to take a little bit more time to dig into today specifically is, as Caroline mentioned, our flagship conservation agreements. So as I'm sure many of you are aware on this call, the monarch butterfly populations in North America have been in decline since the 21st century. And in December of 2020, it was determined by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that the monarch butterfly was warranted for listing under the Endangered Species Act, but at the time, it was precluded for immediate listing due to other species of higher conservation priorities. And one thing that's interesting in their initial decision is that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service emphasized that opportunities for voluntary conservation existed, which could help to protect and support monarchs and hopefully build a lot of monarch habitat in both the usual conservation spaces, but also in non-traditional conservation spaces, and that this opportunity for voluntary conservation could play a large role in helping the overall monarch conservation efforts. Currently, where things are at with the monarch listing is that in December of 2024, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service proposed to list the monarch as threatened under the Endangered Species Act with an associated 4D rule. And as things currently stand, the final listing should occur approximately 12 months after that initial listing proposal came out, which would put it in about December of 2025. And so recognizing that there is a lot of potential for voluntary monarch conservation efforts, both from traditional conservation partners and, importantly, non-traditional conservation partners that fall in that diagram Caroline was showing earlier about what all hands on deck can look like. The Rights of Ways Habitat Working Group, along with our partners in the energy and transportation sectors and our partners in other sectors as well, came together to develop the Monarch Candidate Conservation Agreement with Assurances. A candidate conservation agreement with assurances is a voluntary conservation agreement that exists under Section 10 of the Endangered Species Act. And the goal of these categories of agreements is designed to promote voluntary conservation initiatives from other interested parties. And the idea of these agreements is that by participating in voluntary conservation initiatives before a species is listed, hopefully you could, one, avoid a species being listed down the road, and also the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will in turn recognize the importance of these voluntary conservation initiatives by offering regulatory certainty and operational flexibility to partners who choose to enroll in these agreements. The Monarch CCAA is unique because in addition to being the first nationwide Monarch, the first nationwide CCAA. It is a unique partnership between the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, UIC as the program administrator, and all of the energy and transportation sector partners who participate in this agreement. Ultimately, the goal of the CCAA is to build more than 2 million acres of monarch habitat on energy and transportation rights-of-way throughout the country, and to build that capacity and momentum for monarch conservation, both in the short term by creating habitat on the ground and connecting habitat that already exists, and building the long-term momentum for future conservation as well. Since the agreement was approved in April of 2020, the Monarch CCA currently has 74 applicants from across 46 of the 48 states that the agreement applies to. 37 of these are from energy companies, and 37 of these applicants are from transportation agencies, which ranges from anything including smaller local counties who enroll in the agreement to statewide Department of Transportation. Currently, there is about 7.5 million acres enrolled in the program, and of these 7.5 million acres, 1.2 million of these are conservation acres that are dedicated to being maintained as monarch habitat. To show an example of what the CCA can look like on the ground and what a potential sort of enrollment scenario from a partner could look like, I wanted to show this diagram to highlight what the considerations of the CCA can look like. As I mentioned earlier, the CCA ultimately is a partnership between the energy and transportation organizations who participate in the agreement, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and UIC, who is the program administrator for this program. The role of a partner in the CCAA is to first define what lands they would like to enroll in this program. So some partners choose to enroll their entire system of rights of way, and some choose to start with a specific area where they think that monarch habitat is the most likely to occur. Once they've defined their enrolled lands, which are all the lands for which they would want coverage under this agreement and those assurances from Fish and Wildlife Service, they would then select a certain subset of those enrolled lands, which are called adopted acres. And these adopted acres are where the monarch habitat efforts are taking place. In the scenario that you can see on the left here, enrolled lands include this entire right-of-way segment, including the median strip of grass in the middle, the impervious road surfaces, the areas immediately adjacent to the roadway, as well as these more vegetated areas to the far left and far right of this diagram. This potential enrollment scenario highlights how the CCA is designed to both provide conservation benefit while being flexible in terms of safety and infrastructure management. Those enrolled lands, including that roadway and the clear zones, can be maintained as status quo activities for, in this case, a transportation organization, where partners are still able to do their standard maintenance measures that they need to ensure safety, both for the motorists using it and safety for others as well. But on these areas to the far left and the far right, where it's less likely that there will be interactions from people happening or other things like that, that's where these habitat acres can be made into monarch habitat and other pollinator habitat. On these lands are where partners would commit to implementing certain conservation measures designed to benefit monarch butterflies, and is where they would commit to tracking, monitoring, and reporting on the actions that are happening on these habitat annually. In exchange for partners doing this voluntary conservation work to promote the well-being of monarch butterflies, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service will extend these partners Section 10 incidental take coverage for the monarchs if they should be listed under the Endangered Species Act. In addition to this, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service also provides assurances that if the monarch is listed under the Endangered Species Act, additional conservation measures will not be required from these partners without their consent. So listing decisions for endangered species can change frequently. There is never necessarily a guarantee that a decision will stay the same as it was. And so in all scenarios, the CCA provides certainty to these partners that they know what is expected of them, and they know that they are contributing a net conservation benefit for the well-being of the monarch butterfly. Some of the conservation measures that partners choose to implement on their land are focused on creating habitat to ensure that monarch habitat is available. And the creation of habitat can look like seeding and planting with native flowering plants, and making sure to include milkweed species in that seed selection, as well as doing other measures such as timing the mowing of lands to ensure that mowing is being done when monarchs are the least likely to be harmed or come in contact with the mowers themselves. Other conservation measures that partners can employ include using brush removal or targeted herbicide to ensure that there is not an encroachment of invasive species or noxious weeds, as well as trying to enhance habitat through other measures such as adopting a grazing schedule or prescribed burns. One other conservation measures that many of our partners also choose to implement is just setting aside lands for a certain period of time. So if a land was receiving these active conservation measures, such as the conservation mowing, seeding, and planting, there's also benefit to leaving these maintained lands alone for a year or more sometimes to ensure that there is land available for monarchs where they're not likely to come in contact with any sort of maintenance activities that are happening. I mentioned earlier that one of the components of the CCAA is that partners will track the activities that are happening on the areas that they are adopting as habitat. And the way that they do that is through annual effectiveness monitoring, which occurs on a randomized portion of these adopted acres. So every year, partners will choose to go out and monitor certain points on their adopted acres to see what's happening on the ground and to see what the habitat quality looks like and to try and assess where habitat is currently available or what could be done going forward to expand habitat availability into other areas as well. Partners also submit an annual compliance report, which summarizes what they've done that past year, including details about what the conservation measures are that they've been using on their lands, how that implementation has been going this year, or things that they think could be changed or altered to increase habitat availability going forward, as well as summarizing any of the results of monitoring that they found to see if they're reaching that net conservation benefit goal as established by the CCAA.
So the net conservation benefit goal is incredibly important for the CCAA because we wouldn't know if it was a successful agreement. And it's had, so we finalized it, as Catherine said, in 2020, and we've had just some really significant, really cool impacts so far. So we wanted to share those with you. To head this off, we're going to share some numbers from the past years of that annual reporting. What we do every year is we get those annual reports of the entire year at the end of January. So we are currently reviewing the annual reports of 2024, and so we are currently showing you the annual reporting numbers from 2023. But I would just say, in your head, think even bigger and better, because we've had a lot more partners enroll in the past year. And we've seen some really incredible things in our annual report review so far. So in 2023, we had over 5 million acres that were enrolled in this agreement. And of those 5 million acres, we had nearly 1 million adopted acres, or those conservation acres that Catherine was mentioning. And this is really important because not only is it 1 million or nearly 1 million acres of habitat across the United States, but this is 238% above the target that that they were trying to meet when they enrolled in this agreement. And it's even more important to recognize that this is a voluntary agreement. So nobody is required to enroll in this agreement. They are voluntarily enrolling in this agreement, these companies and organizations. They are voluntarily committing to conservation of habitat when they are enrolling in this agreement. And then they've got to meet this target of conservation acres when they enroll in this agreement. And not only have they met that target of conservation acres, they have gone above that target of voluntary conservation by 238%. Just last year, I actually think we're going to be way above that this year once we do all of the analysis of the data. So just really, I cannot show or explain enough how cool it is what these organizations are doing and committing to, and Catherine will show just some of the pictures and cool things that they're doing in addition to creating habitat. So excuse me, I get excited talking about this, but so in 2023, all of the partners did so. You know, they can choose some of those conservation measures. which ones to do, and all of the conservation measures that Catherine mentioned were implemented last year. And so, you know, the seeding, the set-asides, the targeted herbicides, things like that to reduce invasive species and whatnot. And these conservation measures were conducted across 38 states. Again, we've received a bunch more applications since then, and you saw the map that was totally filled out. So we think that at the end of this year of analysis, it's going to be a really, really brand new, impressive map. We also are looking at the data specifically. So we are verifying all of the data that they send us, and we are aggregating it, and we're looking at it at a large scale just to know that it is having a net conservation impact. And so 31% of the plots that were monitored in the Midwest and the East had more than 6 milkweed stems, and 34% of them in the West and Southwest. West and South had more than 2, which is the required target for the agreement. And of course, we all know that monarchs need milkweed, but they also need nectar resources. And so partners are also monitoring for percent cover of nectar resources when they're looking at those conservation acres. And so 79% of the plots that we looked at, or that our partners looked at, in the Midwest and East, and 77% of those in the West and Southwest had more than 10% nectar plant cover. So we're seeing this impact. We're seeing the incredible things, you know, the changes in habitat that these partners are having by doing these conservation measures on their land. And I will note the last bullet point at the bottom. Our partners are going out, they're picking a random plot on their right-of-way where they're doing their conservation measures. They're going out for a short period of time, and they're looking at this plot. And so we've got a lot of monitoring plots. We've got, you know, in 2023, we've got 3,100. But in this very distinct period of time, 309 of those plots actually saw monarchs. And so these monitoring people actually got to see the work that they're doing and the impacts that they're having, and see these monarchs. And especially with these low numbers, I just thought that was really exciting to see.
So, like Caroline mentioned, our partners are doing a lot of really incredible things to implement the conservation measures of the CCAA on their lands. And I think it's really cool to look at the data in a graph format as well, just to see numbers of that. But I also think it's really, really cool to see the visualization of, you know, we just talked a lot about what these conservation measures look like in sort of an abstract sense and using diagrams, but this is what the actual on the ground work that these partners are doing looks like. And I always think it's very kind when they're able to share these photos with us so we can see. And so special credits to everyone who's mentioned on the screen for sharing these photos from the past year. And you can see that there's a wide range of different activities that are occurring to implement the CCAA on their lands. And many of our partners, in addition to, you can see some of these photos are showing the habitat establishment and the habitat monitoring, but many of our partners also choose to go above and beyond the requirements of the CCAA with their implementation. As you can see in some of these photos where our partners are conducting outreach events to increase monarch conservation awareness with the public, working on events with schools and with kids to make science education about monarch conservation and pollinator conservation more readily accessible. And also just signage that is available about, you know, sometimes one of the things we hear from partners is that a sort of learning curve that they have is conducting outreach to the public and explaining why a right-of-way might look different now than what they're used to, meaning, you know, partners or people in the public might be used to seeing rights of way as short mowed grass. And so when people are seeing these shifts over into prairie habitats and early successional habitat, there sometimes can be a bit of a learning curve of trying to explain to folks why these changes are happening. And so signage work like this and these outreach events are really, really important initiatives that our partners are doing to help explain why these changes are happening and why these changes are beneficial, both in an ecological sense and also why they can also be beneficial in a community and sociological sense as well. One of the things I had mentioned in those past photos is that our partners often go above and beyond the requirements of the CCAA when implementing their conservation measures. And one of the things that we like to do as a program every year is recognize our partners who have gone above and beyond the requirements. Because as Caroline said, this is a completely voluntary program. Even just by doing the bare requirements of the CCAA in terms of the habitat monitoring, they're already doing more than they're being asked to. And so when we have our partners who are choosing to go above and beyond and implement even more conservation measures and do these supplemental conservation measures, we want to recognize that, we want them to know, and we want to recognize them that the work they're doing is incredibly important and that they feel recognized for their work that we're doing. And so I want to take a few minutes to highlight some of our award winners from the past year who have won awards in a variety of categories, including partners who go above and beyond their habitat requirement targets and partners who have implemented out-of-the-box conservation strategies for pollinators and specifically for monarchs as well. From the past year, here are our partners who contributed the highest habitat contributions from 2023, which, as Caroline said, is the most recently available data that we have. One thing I want to mention for this slide in particular is that you'll see we have these small, medium, and large categories. What this is referring to is that we try to scale these awards to be fair and accurate to the amount of land that a partner has enrolled. So I mentioned that, we have local counties who are enrolled in this program, in addition to statewide departments of transportation. They have a very different scope of land that they have enrolled in the agreement, and so ranking them on the same tier wouldn't be an accurate reflection of the work that we're doing. And so we have it scaled to reflect that our our partners with a smaller amount of enrolled lands can be ranked in the same category, medium and large, as well for their own categories. And so considering these factors, here the results from the past year showed that in our transportation sectors, Washington County and Minnesota was Virginia Department of Transportation and the Texas Department of Transportation were our highest contributors for the past year from the transportation sector. And on the energy side of things, we had East Central Energy, Belco, and ITC Holdings as our top contributors for the year. And you can even see, just looking at the percentages, many of our partners aren't just contributing a little bit above the target that they are set as terms of the agreement. They're contributing amounts that are far above the requirements of what they're being asked to, which again, this is a lot of work for partners to implement and to change the way things are being done. And so when partners are able to do it to this degree as well, it's really inspiring to listen to them and hear the process of how they were able to do this work be explained. I had also mentioned that in addition to recognizing the highest habitat contributions from the past year, we also like to recognize out-of-the-box solutions as well, because part of the CCAA, of course, is implementing these habitat conservation initiatives on the ground and making sure that restoration activities are happening and that sort of thing as well. But other aspects of the CCAA, again, involve, education and outreach and other supplemental measures that are important to conservation. And I want to take a chance to recognize two of our out-of-the-box award winners from the past year. From the transportation side of things, the Vermont Agency of Transportation was one of our award winners for the out-of-the-box awards from the past year for two different initiatives that they were leading. They were part of a group that was leading a study to develop native, low-maintenance, ecologically beneficial, and ecotypic seed mixes for the Northeast region. This was a partnership between a couple of different transportation organizations, as well as a study with some universities in the area and other working groups who were involved in this kind of project. And this study ultimately was focused on ways to increase the availability of native seeds throughout New England. One of the constraints that we do sometimes hear from partners and from other folks who are interested in starting larger scale restoration work is that the availability of native seeds, or rather the lack of availability, is one thing sometimes that can hold them back. And so we wanted to recognize that studies like this and funding this research to develop these new strategies is incredibly important for expanding the conservation work that is possible going forward. And speaking of expanding the conservation work, the other aspect of their implementation of the CCAA from this past year that was particularly notable and we wanted to recognize was their involvement with local students in their CCAA implementation. They had summer interns from colleges involved with their environmental group in the summer of 2023, and these students were responsible for assisting with their CCAA monitoring for the past year. In addition to helping and getting these students involved with the on-the-ground work, the group also asked the summer interns to create a GIS story map that summarized their experience working to implement the CCAA, and VTrans was kind enough to actually share a copy of that story map. So we got to see what the students thought of the CCAA and what they thought of the work they were doing, which again, involving students in this process and increasing the amount of education and outreach opportunities that are available for conservation on rights of way is incredibly important and valuable for us to see as well. Another partner who used a different approach, but a no less out of the box approach for their sort of supplemental measures for the CCA in this year was NiSource, who is one of our energy partners that operates in the Midwest and Eastern states. Their out of the box contribution fell more into the sustainability and nature-based reporting side of things. So they were, oh, sorry, I do see in the comment, we have a caption for that as well. That is a viceroy in the photo, not a monarch. We included it because it was a very nice photo. But I included it in the caption, but I did forget to mention that. So thank you for that. Sorry, NiSource was one of our partners who is responsible for their energy sector contribution through the CCAA. And in 2023, they were a part of a group that helped to draft over 20 different biodiversity management plans for IUCN key biodiversity areas. And these management plans are strongly aligned with the CCAA conservation measures that are established in the agreement. And so one of the things that's incredibly important about these management plans is that the CCA is one aspect of how monarch conservation can look on rights of way, but it's also important to recognize that other biodiversity management plans, which can expand the conservation work that is being done, is also incredibly important to involving non-traditional conservation partners in monarch conservation efforts. And to this end of involving more folks in the work that the CCAA is doing to try and establish this conservation efforts, NiSource also helped to establish a rapid assessment protocol in Indiana for an extension of the Tier 3 pollinator scorecard. The pollinator scorecard was one of the tools that Caroline had mentioned earlier, which is a way for our partners to assess and monitor their habitat for pollinators on their rights of way. The Tier 3 is the most detail-oriented version of the scorecard and involves the most information that's being collected. And so an extension of that is incredibly helpful for folks who want even more in-depth information about the plots that they're monitoring. And to this end, they also created a restoration tracker that includes details on restoration activities at a given site, such as the location of it, what seed mixes are being used, the conservation measures that are being implemented, the monitoring data, and the geospatial data of the particular plot. Both of these examples of the out-of-the-box awards really highlight to me how different out-of-the-box approaches can look and the value in both of these. VTrans was important in emphasizing the ability to fund research and why that is valuable, as well as the education and outreach component of conservation initiatives. And NiSource was emphasizing that there's a way to expand the work that the CCA is doing and a way to expand the tools that are available to partners. And both of these aspects of expanding the work of the CCA are incredibly valuable, and we're always grateful to our partners for continuing to push this work forward and increase this going forward as well.
I always have trouble finding my unmute. So we, as you've seen, our partners are doing the on-the-ground work. They are engaging the public. They are tracking and monitoring that work. And I want to take you back to the all hands strategy from the White House. So after that strategy came out from the White House, Wayne Thogmartin, and some other researchers came out with a research study, also focusing on all hands on deck. And they noted that for the conservation of the monarch butterfly, we needed more than 1.3 billion stems of milkweed to achieve conservation targets. Now, making some assumptions with the CCAA and what are the target conservation measures, target conservation acres and target milkweed stems on that. With the enrollments that we have right now, we can estimate that the CCAA contributions alone, so just our 70 plus partners that have enrolled in the CCAA with their contributions of habitat, are representing about 10%, 5 to 13% of the conservation target that is required from the all hands on deck research paper. And so we just wanted to point this out because 74 organizations across the United States are representing 10% of this conservation that is needed for the Monarch. We do anticipate receiving more applications over the next year before the final listing. Again, this is just a reminder of the level of commitment that these organizations have done to create and conserve this habitat, and the impact that these organizations are having on the monarch butterfly, the positive impact that these organizations are having on the monarch. So I think it's just a really neat reminder that that this is having a large and scalable effect, and doesn't take into account the conservation of the other hands on the deck, but is a significant contribution to that conservation. I also wanted to mention that that our partners are able to utilize the CCAA in part of their sustainability reporting. So voluntary agreement, they are committing to and creating this habitat. But it can be really challenging sometimes for these organizations to get buy-in from everybody. And so by being able to utilize the CCAA in your sustainability reporting is important, because it can get more of that stakeholder buy-in internally and externally. And it works because of this third-party verification of this conservation by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They're also collecting data, so they're able to prove that they are having a net conservation benefit. They're tracking and quantifying their habitat. They're giving it to UIC. We review it, we assess it, and evaluate it, and monitor the success of this program, and also share it again with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And so it's a neat tool in the suite of conservation and sustainability tools that allow these organizations the ability to enroll in agreements like this if they might not have full support otherwise, because they can get credit for the work that they are doing. They can also soon get credit for other conservation agreements like the at-risk bumblebee agreement.
Thank you, Caroline. So like Caroline mentioned, there is a new conservation agreement that UIC and the Rights of Way as Habitat Working Group has been developing. Thanks for the success of the CCAA and its buy-in from both industry partners and conservation partners. And the goal of this bumblebee agreement is to target 11 at-risk species who are at different stages of conservation need, and to create an agreement that works in tandem with the Monarch CCAA, but has a few key measures that are designed specifically to help support these bumblebee populations. This agreement, similarly to the Monarch CCAA, is a collaboration between the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, our industry advisory team, and the conservation technical team, who have all been important in advising on the agreement and making sure that it meets the net conservation benefit, while also being a feasible thing for our partners to implement. To sort of emphasize what a potential joint enrollment scenario could look like for the Monarch CCA and the Bumblebee CBA, and how these agreements are designed to work in tandem, I wanted to show a diagram illustrating what a potential enrollment scenario could look like for a right-of-way partner who is interested in participating in the agreements. You can see here that there is a key difference between the Monarch CCA and the Bumblebee CBA, in that the Monarch CCAA has these enrolled lands, which I mentioned earlier are all the lands for which a partner would want coverage under the agreement, and a subset of those are the adopted acres where partners would be contributing habitat. The Bumblebee CBA does not make a distinction between enrolled lands and adopted acres, because on all enrolled lands in the Bumblebee CBA, a partner would be asked to ensure that there is avoidance of known bumblebee nests, and that there is mowing to reduce potential exposure of these nests to harm. And so the reason why this measure is a key difference between the agreements is that it was determined through work with our conservation technical team that ensuring nests were being safely handled is one of the key aspects of that would be needed to help increase bumblebee conservation down the road. And so ensuring that nests were being properly handled in all scenarios and avoiding them when possible was one of the key conservation goals and outcomes for this agreement. With that being said, while the avoidance of known nest sites is a distinction between the two agreements, the other conservation measures, including the active conservation measures such as the brush removal, targeted herbicide, seeding and planting, as well as the inactive conservation measures of the idle land set-asides, those are all the same between both agreements. So in this potential enrollment scenario you can see here, a partner could choose to employ idle land set-asides on this blue sort of highlighted box at the top, which would just be land that they're leaving alone. And in that gold bar in the middle, that could be land where there's brush removal or targeted herbicide happening to help control invasive species. The only difference between these, between just enrolling in the Monarch CCAA and then also choosing to enroll in the Bumblebee CBA is that across this entire strip of land highlighted here would be, again, that avoidance of the known nest sites. And so functionally, this orange box down below, previously where that would have only been enrolled lands in the CCAA, that land will also have, again, that avoidance of nest sites throughout in this joint enrollment scenario. With that being said, again, the overlap of the conservation measures between agreements, as well as the implementation of the agreements, the monitoring requirements, and the tracking and reporting requirements are designed to complement one another for both agreements to limit the amount of administrative work that would be needed to be performed by a partner. As I mentioned earlier, there are 11 species which are being covered under this agreement, and we do have a map that shows the available records of 6 of these 11 species in this map that you can see here. The data for this map was obtained from the Bumblebees of North America dataset. And so if you're interested in seeing the bumblebee species that occur near where you're at or near where a group that you're interested in is at, feel free to scan the QR code to get a more detailed picture of what the species range for 6 of these species look like. Thank you. To quickly highlight where the timeline of things are at, the Bumblebee agreement currently is not open for enrollment yet. We have submitted the agreement to Fish and Wildlife Service and are waiting on their review of the agreement and to have that agreement finalized. Hopefully, if all goes as well, we would hope to have the agreement authorized and the permit for this agreement issued sometime either this spring or early summer.
Okay, so we hit you with a ton, but we always have opportunities to learn more about what we do at the for the Rights of Ways Habitat Working Group, as well as about the Monarch CCAA. So I think for the 3rd year now in a row, we are partnering with the Monarch Joint Venture to host just the best conference that you will ever go to in your entire life. This one is called the North American Monarch Summit, and we are going to have infrastructure-focused breakout sessions, but of course, anyone that is involved in monarch conservation is welcome, and we hope to learn from each other and share best management practices and figure out how we can collaborate at a national level for conservation. So I hope to see you all there. We have a couple of days left for early bird registration prices, which ends on Friday. So I would also encourage you all to register now instead of waiting, and see you all there. So we're a couple minutes over time, but I think we are ready for questions. We also have our website and each of our emails there. There is a U at the end of Catherine's email address. I think that was my fault, so I'm sorry. So include that edu at the end of it.
Awesome, fantastic. Thank you guys so much. Thank you to both Caroline and Catherine for sharing their knowledge with us today. We are going to take a few minutes to answer questions. We will not get to all of your questions today because there are a lot of them. And so we do want to make sure that we have time to answer some of these, but we'll likely be sending our presenters some follow-ups. So when we send out our follow-up email, we'll try and make sure that we get as many questions answered as possible, of course. So I'm going to start kind of with some basics just for some folks that joined a little late or just need some clarification. Can you just tell us again what CCAA stands for, and then CBA, the kind of what those acronyms are for. A lot of acronyms in this world.
Yes, Candidate Conservation Agreement with Assurances, and then so that's CCAA, and then Conservation Benefit Agreement for the Bumblebee.
Perfect. Thank you. And then, so what advantages do the partners receive in turn for their enrollment in this program, aside from like a PR or something of that nature? What's the benefits for them?
Yeah, Catherine, you want to take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned earlier when I was discussing the partnership between U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the partners, that partners receive coverage for certain activities. More specifically, what that means is that in the event of a potential monarch listing, there is concern from some partners that standard operations and maintenance activities, including things such as vegetation management, so mowing on rights of way, other operations in terms of updating structures, things of that nature, could be considered an activity that could cause take of monarchs. And if the monarch was listed under the Endangered Species Act, there would be a lot of sort of permitting work required to get the approvals necessary to do some of the standard work, which could severely slow down an energy or transportation organization who is trying to do their standard maintenance work. The advantage of participating in the CCAA is that there is that streamlining of the regulatory process. So because a partner is choosing to do voluntary conservation initiatives and is taking the initiative to make sure that they are providing a conservation benefit, they receive assurances from Fish and Wildlife Service that some of their activities, including again operations and maintenance activities, would be covered under the CCA, and they would need to go through those additional permitting stages in most cases. And so they receive, and again, they also receive the assurance from Fish and Wildlife Service that they would not need to do additional conservation measures unless without their explicit approval, because they're doing the conservation work ahead of time to ensure that there is a net conservation benefit happening, which, you know, is thought to sort of outweigh the potential take in these operations and management activities.
Awesome, thank you. And so for individuals, is there a way to find like a list of electric utilities or utility companies that have signed up and are participating in this agreement?
Yes, so we have on our website under Monarch CCAA, there is an enrollment tab, and then we've got like a pop-out map. Make sure if you've got a pop-out blocker to disable that, because you click on the state that you're interested in, and it will pop up with the enrolled partners. I will caveat that with we have had a lot of partners apply in the past couple of months, and so it might not be totally up to date, but we are working our hardest to ensure that it is up to date. So keep clicking on it to look.
Awesome, thank you. And then like kind of in line with that and understanding those, who are the Canadian partners that you all are working with at this time?
It's a challenging one because there's a lot of them, but so there are a number of so we've got our chapter with the Canadian Wildlife Federation that is hosting the Rights Ways Habitat Working Group in Canada, but we also have CCAA partners that crisscross Canada and the United States. And so if you are only a Canadian organization, you can't enroll in this agreement, but we do have Canadian partners that are part of the Rights of Ways Habitat Working Group, but not necessarily part of the CCAA.
Awesome, thank you. This one got quite a few upvotes, so I'm gonna ask this one. There have been some concerns about putting monarch conservation areas adjacent to highways because it could increase mortality and car strikes with the butterflies. Are these valid concerns? Do we have studies demonstrating that we should or shouldn't be concerned in relationship to that?
Yeah, it's a valid concern, and it gets brought up a lot. We actually were doing a roadside mortality study with MJV, but from what we've seen from the studies and discussed with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, it is still having, so typically the habitat is not directly on top of the road, right? So there's typically a buffer zone where a car can pull off to the side, which gives us a little bit more buffer for the pollinators. But being enrolled in this agreement is still showing that there's a net conservation benefit to the monarch by having this habitat. Even if it might increase monarch strikes, it is still having an increase and benefit to the monarch overall.
I'll also
And
just
sorry, go ahead, Catherine.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I'll also add to that there was a paper published in 2024 by Meinzen et al., which was asking the question of, is roadside habitat ultimately a positive or a negative for monarchs and other pollinators? And what the conclusions of that paper sort of drew is that it's very context specific. So one thing that is important to note with the CCAA too is that it's not only roadside rights of way, it's also utility rights of way as well. And even with the roadside rights of way and those potential concerns about collisions or pollution affecting the health of the pollinators there, it really depends on the kind and the area of that you're enrolling. So some areas in a more densely populated urban area might not be as good quality habitat, but other more rural rights of way, which many of our partners do enroll just due to the availability of the land that is there, can offer in some cases higher quality habitat that also has less of the risks that are traditionally associated with building habitat on roadsides as well.
That's awesome. Thank you, Kat. And we'll be sure to include that paper reference, or at least the citation for that paper that Catherine's referencing, if you ever want to take a look at it as well. Some astute folks noticed when you guys were showing the map that there were slightly lesser participation in the western portion of the US. So some curiosities about why that might be, why there's fewer supported acres in that general area, and as it relates to the CCAA.
Catherine, do you want to answer that?
So I think that a lot of that ultimately boils down to, as Caroline mentioned, we've had an influx of applications in the past year alone. So many of our Western partners have just applied in the past few months or year. And so we're just starting to get that data in this year. I think that a lot of that can be due to the fact that some of the partners out West have had I think more coordination to do, just because the considerations of the Western population are different than the Eastern population. And so what we've heard from those partners is that they were just doing work both internally and with each other to figure out what a good conservation strategy would look like for that particular region. And so the short answer of that is they're just getting enrolled now. And so hopefully we'll see that conservation work and what is happening on the ground there in the next year and going forward.
That's awesome. Thank you. And another few questions in the same kind of realm as this: are there any concerns about continued partnerships and funding as it relates to the federal government at this time in this program?
Not really. So the agreement was actually finalized in 2020 under the first Trump administration, and so this agreement is really incredible because it crosses political boundaries. Anyone, everyone likes the monarch and supports the monarch, and so this is really an apolitical issue or initiative, I guess, for the monarch. And it's also funded by the partners enrolling in the agreement. And so we are not reliant on any federal funds for this agreement. An organization will pay an administrative fee for us to review the data, review the application, do the outreach and tool building for them. And so this is a kind of a standalone agreement, but that has been supported by for the last 5 years.
Awesome, thank you. So this kind of goes into the partners and those participating in kind of that group of utilities. Are there many solar panel fields participating in this program? And what kind of impacts do they have when it comes to habitat as it relates to monarchs and pollinators?
Catherine, you want to go, or would you like me to?
No, I'm happy to answer that. We've had some participation from solar partners in the agreements as well. We also have a project that is called the PHASE project, which if I'm remembering the acronym correctly, is pollinator habitat aligned with solar energy. Okay, cool, got that one right. Which is a project specifically dedicated to seeing how implementation of CCAS conservation measures would look on solar fields. And so that's been a project that I think is just finishing up this year, but has been an interesting sort of analysis of what the considerations are for solar partners. And we do have a few partners who are currently enrolled in the CCAA who are solar companies, and we hope to try and expand that going forward as well.
Yeah, they're becoming more and more popular and more widely implemented, and so we anticipate getting many more applications from solar organizations soon.
All right, I think we've got time for basically one more question. I do want to stress that we did not get to all of your questions. We know we didn't get to them. We are going to do our best to get answers for them for you. So the final question, there was a lot of folks interested in how there's potential for them to get involved. So for instance, how could a master naturalist group get involved? Is there opportunities for folks to be involved in the monitoring of these spaces and support this project? What does that look?
Yes, 100% yes. We want everyone involved. We want everyone helping and contributing to conservation. So the monitoring is a great example for that. It's a pretty standard monitoring process. I would encourage you to either reach out to us and we could put you in contact with the organization near you, or to reach out to them directly. You can help them monitor. And that is one of the really neat things about the Bumblebee agreement as well, is that they can get an enrollee can get credit for doing additional research and working with their constituents. And so monitoring is a great one, helping with seeding and planting, not calling and complaining if it looks a little scrappy, because sometimes it does need to look a little scrappy. So there's plenty of opportunities to support your organizations enrolling in this agreement, and I would encourage you to do so.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. I do want to note we are right at the end of the hour here, so that's about all the time that we have for these questions. Thank you to our presenters. Thank you to those of you that were able to join us today and learn more about this program and what Rights of Way can do in relationship to pollinator habitat. We would love for you to fill out our feedback form, so please check out that link that Jenna just plopped right on into the chat there. To help us know what kind of topics you might be interested in and what makes sense. We do hope to see you next month for our webinar, which will be on Tuesday, March 25th. It's going to be Grasslands Ecology 101, Disturbance Ecology, and that is with Brittany Smith, who is the Habitat Manager at the Monarch Joint Venture. And I want to say thank you again to our presenters and to all of you joining us. Hope you all have a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you.